power flickered again, plunging the living room into momentary darkness. My wife, Sarah, shrieked, spilling popcorn on the coffee table. "Seriously?" she grumbled, reaching for the lamp. It was the third time in an hour. We'd moved to this neighborhood just 2 weeks ago, a quaint little pocket nestled between towering oaks and Victorian houses. It had an air of forgotten charm, a throwback to a simpler time. But the charm was wearing thin with the constant power outages. "Maybe it's a transformer blowing," I said, trying to sound optimistic. Sarah wasn't buying it. The worried crease between her brows deepened. "It never flickered like this in the old place." "It's probably just old wiring," I countered, hoping to quell her rising anxiety. The lights flickered back to life, revealing a neighborhood cloaked in an unnatural silence. Not a single house had an outside light on. It was as if everyone had vanished. "This is weird," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. I walked to the window, peering out at the deserted street. The streetlights, powered by a separate grid, remained stubbornly lit, casting long, skeletal shadows across the empty road. A sudden chill prickled my skin, a primal sense of unease settling in my gut. "Maybe we should call someone," I suggested, my own voice a shade too high. Just then, a guttural screech echoed from outside, scraping like fingernails across a chalkboard. It originated somewhere down the street, a sound that defied description, sending shivers down my spine. Sarah gasped, clutching at my arm. Another flicker and the lights plunged us into darkness once more. The silence returned, broken only by the frantic thudding of my own heart. A few seconds later, a faint, rhythmic thumping started. It sounded distant at first, but quickly grew louder, closer. It was coming from the street. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and flicked it on. Sarah clung to me as we inched towards the window. Holding my breath, I peeked out. My blood ran cold. Down the street lumbered a hulking figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, easily twice the height of a house. Its body was shrouded in darkness, obscured by the long shadows cast by the streetlights. The only thing visible was a single glowing red eye, pulsating like a malevolent ember. It walked with a lumbering gait, its movements jerky and unnatural. The rhythmic thumping came from its feet, each step shaking the ground with a dull tremor. As it lumbered closer, the glow from the red eye intensified, illuminating a glimpse of its skeletal form. Bone protruded from ripped flesh, and long, gnarled claws scraped against the pavement, sending sparks flying. Sarah let out a strangled sob, burying her face in my chest. I fought the urge to follow suit, forcing myself to remain calm. We had to get help. But how? The landline phone was silent. My cell phone in my pocket showed no signal. We were completely isolated, trapped in our darkened house with a monstrous entity stalking the streets outside. The creature was nearing our house now. The red eye seemed to be fixated on us, its glow burning with an unholy intensity. My mind raced, searching for an escape plan, but none came. Suddenly, the creature stopped. It turned its head, the red eye focusing on something beyond our house. In the distance, a low guttural moan echoed. The creature responded with a similar noise, a sound filled with primal rage. Then, without warning, it shifted direction and turned away. The rhythmic thumping faded into the distance as the monstrous figure lumbered away from us, following the sound of the new moan. We stood there, frozen in shock, long after the creature had disappeared. The silence returned, broken only by our ragged breaths. Sarah finally pulled away from me, her eyes wide with terror. What was that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I shook my head, unable to form words. The image of the creature, its grotesque form and glowing red eye, was burned into my mind. The power flickered back to life, bathing the room in an unwelcome glare. The clock on the wall blinked back to life, displaying the time, 10:27 p.m. 15 minutes had passed, but it felt like an eternity. We didn't sleep that night. We huddled together on the couch, the the sounds of the outside world a constant source of anxiety. Every creak of the house, every creak of the house, every rustle of wind against the window sent our hearts hammering in our chests. Dawn arrived eventually, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange, a stark contrast to the horror of the night. As the first rays of sunlight crept in through the window, a strange sense of normalcy returned to the neighborhood. Birds chirped, squirrels scampered across the lawn, and a lone jogger trotted down the street, oblivious to the nightmarish events that had unfolded just hours earlier. "Maybe it was a hallucination," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. I yearned to believe her, but a cold dread gnawed at me. The memory of the creature was too vivid, the fear too real. We needed answers. We ventured outside, the once charming street now holding a sinister air. The houses, with their peeling paint and overgrown yards, looked less idyllic and more like silent observers, harboring secrets. We decided to walk down the street, hoping to find someone, anyone, who could explain what we'd witnessed. The first few houses we approached were deserted. No answer came when we knocked. A sense of growing unease settled over me. Finally, at a small, ivy-covered house at the end of the street, a flicker of movement in the living room window caught my eye. A woman, gaunt and pale with wild silver hair, peered back at us. "Excuse me?" Sarah called out hesitantly. "We just moved in a couple of weeks ago and, well, last night." The woman's face remained blank for a moment, then a flicker of recognition passed through her eyes. She opened the door a crack, peering out at us with an unnervingly calm stare. "You saw it," she said, her voice a raspy whisper. "It?" I echoed. She nodded, her lips barely moving. "The Harbinger. It comes every few nights looking for offerings." A shiver ran down my spine. "Offerings? It feeds," she explained, her voice devoid of emotion, "on fear." Her words clarified nothing, but as she spoke, a memory from earlier that day surfaced in my mind. On a flyer tucked inside the welcome basket left by the realtor, a small announcement had mentioned a bonfire night the following week, organized by the neighborhood residents. "What about the bonfire?" Sarah asked, voicing my unspoken thought. The woman's eyes widened for a fraction of a second. "Don't go," she rasped, slamming the door shut in our faces. The air hung heavy with unspoken dread. We stood there, stunned, the weight of her cryptic words hanging in the air. Back at our house, the news was filled with reports of strange occurrences across the country, power outages, unexplained animal noises, and a rise in people experiencing vivid nightmares. Was it all connected? Was this Harbinger part of some wider phenomenon? The night of the bonfire arrived, casting an orange glow across the street. We watched from our window, torn between a morbid curiosity and a deep-seated fear. Around a dozen people, faces obscured by flickering firelight, stood chanting around a blazing pyre. The scene sent chills down my spine. It felt like a dark ritual, not a community gathering. Suddenly, a guttural roar echoed from the distance. The chanting stopped, replaced by panicked screams. Through the trees, we saw the silhouetted figure of the Harbinger approaching the bonfire. The people scattered, running for their lives, but it was too late. The creature lunged, its glowing red eye fixated on one of the fleeing figures. There was a sickening crunch, followed by a blood-curdling scream. Sarah buried her face in my shoulder, tears streaming down her cheeks. The image of the creature feasting on its victim burned itself onto my retinas. We couldn't stay here any longer. We packed our bags in a frenzy, the memory of the woman's warning echoing in our minds. We had to get away, escape the Harbinger and whatever else lurked in this cursed neighborhood. Just as we were about to leave, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. We turned to see the old woman, her face twisted in a macabre grin. "Where are you going?" she croaked, her voice laced with a chilling amusement. "The Harbinger feeds on fear, and it doesn't like to be left hungry." The front door swung open behind her, revealing the other neighborhood residents, their faces contorted into grotesque masks of terror and hunger. We were trapped. The bonfire cast its orange glow on their twisted faces, the shadows hiding a multitude of sharpened tools and makeshift weapons. Panic surged through me, momentarily paralyzing. But the guttural roar of the approaching Harbinger snapped me back to reality. Survival instinct kicked in. "Sarah, run!" I yelled, shoving her towards the back door. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes wide with terror. Then, with a scream, she sprinted towards the back of the house. I knew escape through the front door was impossible. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance out back. I lunged past the woman, ignoring the chorus of guttural growls rising behind me. Reaching the kitchen, I grabbed the heaviest knife I could find from the drawer. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. The back door splintered as the possessed resident slammed into it. I flung myself through just as the door gave way, a desperate prayer escaping my lips. The yard was shrouded in darkness, the only light flickering from the distant bonfire. I sprinted across the dew-covered grass, the shouts of the possessed residents echoing behind me. Just as I reached the fence, a bony hand clamped onto my shoulder. I screamed, twisting around to see the woman, her face contorted in a feral grin. "Leaving so soon?" she rasped, her voice dripping with malice. Adrenaline surged through me. With a primal yell, I brought the knife down, slashing at her arm. She shrieked, a surprised yelp before reeling back. I didn't wait to see the damage. I clambered over the fence, the rough wood tearing at my clothes. I crashed through the undergrowth on the other side, ignoring the scrapes and scratches tearing at my skin. The sound of the Harbinger's approaching roar filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Ahead, I saw the faint glow of headlights. A car. My only hope. I stumbled out of the woods, screaming for help. The car slowed, then stopped. A young woman with concerned eyes peered out the window. "Are you all right?" she called out. "Help me!" I gasped, throwing open the passenger door. "There's something chasing me." Before I could explain further, a monstrous figure emerged from the trees. The Harbinger. Its red eye glowed with malevolent hunger. The woman screamed, but before the creature could reach us, she floored the car. We sped away from the cursed neighborhood, the distant roars of the Harbinger and the possessed residents fading into the night. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky with a hopeful orange, I finally allowed myself to relax. Relief washed over me, tinged with a deep sadness for Sarah. I didn't know if I'd ever find her or if she had even made it out. But one thing was certain. I could never return to that nightmare of a neighborhood. The scars, both physical and mental, would forever serve as a chilling reminder of the night the Harbinger came.